Wendigo psychosis is a term given to people who experience some sort of psychological break that causes them to crave human flesh, even though they have access to other food supplies. After first tasting human flesh, victims of Wendigo psychosis are unable to eat any other food than human flesh. They see themselves as an invincible man-eating monster that can't be satisfied by anything but human. This illness was thought to occur when a person had been exposed to a malevolent spirit of the Wendigo and was feared more than death itself. In fact, it was considered to be better to kill oneself than to succumb to cannibalistic desires and risk becoming a Wendigo. Those who chose to seek treatment were often fed large quantities of hot fat and grease in the hopes that these proteins would satisfy the victim's cravings. If the cravings couldn't be satisfied, the perceived Wendigos were then executed. During a particularly harsh winter in 1878, a trapper in Canada named Swift Runner was facing starvation with his family. It is still unclear if his eldest son died of natural causes, or if he was sacrificed to feed the family, but we do know that the family resorted to eating the body of the son to evade starvation. After eating his eldest son, Swift Runner became consumed with greed for human flesh and killed his wife and remaining 5 children in order to cannibalize them. When the winter was over and he was discovered for his crimes, he was put to trial for killing and eating his family. When it was determined that he was only 25 miles away from the nearest supply outpost and could have avoided starvation by simply traveling to obtain more food once the weather lightened, he was diagnosed with Wendigo psychosis. Eventually, Swift Runner confessed to having Wendigo psychosis and killing and eating his family for the pleasure of devouring human flesh. He was then executed. By the tale of the Wendigo, it is often seen as a warning against corruption that was told to prevent people from engaging in these immoral, cannibalistic behaviors. The Wendigo was also likely used to serve as a metaphor to understand terrible acts committed by other people that couldn't be understood otherwise. As the tale of the Wendigo is associated with the colder climates, it is often hypothesized that the tale was told to prevent people from engaging in the taboo act of eating human flesh. It has also helped to dehumanize those who did decide to eat the flesh of humans, by giving others the explanation that they had been overcome with a Wendigo spirit and were no longer human. Now there are the modern cases of Wendigo obsession. On July 30th, 2008, Timothy Macklin got on a bus to travel to Winnipeg, Manitoba. Macklin returned home from Edmonton, where he participated in a carnival parade. On the bus, Macklin snuggled into his chair and dozed off, and soon his neighbor, Vince Lee, fell on him with a knife while he was sleeping. Totally insane in appearance, Lee sliced him to death with the knife and terrified everyone on the bus, including his driver. The bus driver immediately stopped, opened the door, and rushed out to bring help, and before that, he closed the door outside so the killer could not run away. However, Lee was not going to even try to run away. He neatly separated the head of Macklin with the same knife from the body, and then began to cut the body itself and delve into the insides. Passengers were sick and vomited from a bloody spectacle, but Lee was calm and cut the meat as he chewed it, put some of the pieces, like an ear, into the bag and some into his pocket, to reserve for later. When the police arrived on scene and took him into custody, the murderer had already managed to eat a decent amount of flesh from the victim. And no, this is not a legend and not just something made up. It's a completely real case, which the press later wrote about. Vince Lee worked at McDonald's, and according to his boss, he was an ordinary guy, friendly, quiet, but restrained by his emotions. He never had any conflicts with any other people. According to the passengers, before the attack, Lee was sitting next to McLean, but he could not disturb him in any way. McLean had been dozing off and listening to music with his headphones. Lee sat and looked at everything, looked at him, and then, suddenly, something in his head went crazy. When the investigation into this terrible incident began, it turned out that just a few days before, Lee had bought several copies of the Edmonton Sun newspaper, where there was an interview with a man named Nathan Carlson, who is considered to be a great Wendigo expert. Because of this, it was rumored that after reading this article, Lee became obsessed with the Wendigo and went insane with Wendigo psychosis. Wendigos are real, and the one that has been sighted all over Texas is the same one I saw a couple of times. The last time I saw a clear, detailed body, and I'll never forget its huge black eyes. I've heard its mimicry of dying animals, and even my old friend calling for help from the dark forest, even though I knew they were home because I dropped them off at their house and walked home myself. It's tried to lure me into the woods, but I know its games by now. In the winter of 2016, twice in 2018 around the fall months, and again in the new year of 2019. January 12th, 2019 to be exact. It was a relatively cold night, with slight misting. I circled my whole town, because it's pretty small. Coming home, I walked by this large patch of woods nobody goes in except me, because I'm that adventurous type. As I'm coming up to it, with the woods on my right and an old metal building with two small white houses beside it to my left, I see this tall 8 to 10 foot pale figure briskly walk across the dirt road from me to one of the houses to the woods and then about 40 feet in front of me. I know I saw something, but I ignored it anyway and continued walking forward, trying to think it was just a person. But then this feeling of heaviness and dread washes over me as if I'm being watched. I take out my phone and switch on the light app and keep it aimed at the woods. I turn my head back and forth from the houses to the woods as I'm walking still. About the 5th time, I looked back at the woods, and there it is. It's on all fours, crouching over, but it's easily still 5 feet tall at the shoulder. I'm around 5 feet, by the way, so that's how I could tell. It was again only about 40 feet away. It had bleached-looking white skin, a bald head, huge black eyes, and a human face and body, except it looked extremely emaciated, and its arms were like super long twigs. Now it started and it swayed its body back and forth like a praying mantis. That's when I ran as fast as I could. I only looked over my shoulder after I'd run an entire block. It didn't chase me, but I'm pretty sure it was upset that I interrupted its spying session on the people sleeping in those houses. Please be careful in Yorktown, Texas at night. If you're here, I know you'll believe me and probably take my advice. There is no easy way to tell the tale of facing a Wendigo. I won't give my name away, so my name will be Alex due to the severity of this story. Before you read on, know one detrimental detail. This story is 100% true, without over-exaggeration. So please, without any further wait, let's begin my horrifying yet eye-opening experience. On September 13th of 2016, I was driving up the Bighorn Mountains above Buffalo, Wyoming. Just like every trip, I packed accordingly. 2 bottles of water, 6 Nutri-Grain bars, and my loaded handgun. I drove up 4 to 5 times per week, never worrying on any ghost stories or monsters. As far as I knew, these mountains were harmless, besides predators seldomly seen, and the normal weather interference. But something in me changed on September 13th. Instead of going to my usual neck of the woods, I went to a remote campsite known as Hedger, 15 miles up from town. It's a beautiful place where if you cross the fence, you can climb to a peak and oversee for days. As I was looking over the majestic snow-covered landscape, I saw a tall, slender figure marching through the blanket of powder. Now, normally, I would drop it as a hunter on the move, but Hedger was far from any known hunting locations. To this day, I wish I would have packed up and left. I wish I didn't peek through my binoculars, but sometimes securing curiosity is the only safe option. I'll never let myself forget the moment I peered through the cold glass over the winter plateau. As I focused my lenses and the figure came to clarity, I dropped behind the rocks. It was looking back at me as if it could see me. That would be impossible for a human. I was over 1,000 feet away, and more hidden by a rock than anything else, and we were within the tree line. I peeked back up, using only the top of my head to look again. It was just standing there, sniffing the air and staring straight at me. My heart sank and I couldn't move. I was frozen in fear. About 200 feet behind me was a small rock cave, big enough to squeeze into and deep enough to hide in the dark. I slowly made my way, inching backward. I took one last look and noticed that it was sprinting towards me. I moved as fast as possible to the hole and tucked in. The moment I made it, the creature was standing feet from where I was. Its skin was damp in appearance and completely gray. It also had long hands and fingers to match that turned into dagger-like nails. I cupped my mouth to hide my breathing, which became a challenge due to the cold. But as I moved my hand, a rock tumbled. I looked down at the rock just to look back up and see its cold eyes peering through the hole. It was almost as if it couldn't see me, but it knew something was there. I stood still as a statue. It reached in and almost grasped my pack. After 5 minutes of forever, it gave up and took back to sniffing. I waited there in shock, and a daunting weight of fright casting over me every moment in the passing. It quickly got dark as night fell, and it finally wandered off. I waited until I felt assured to poke my head out. I took a long look around and saw nothing, not even a footprint. I took time in watching my steps to stay quiet and made my way back down to my car. I used my key to unlock it rather than using the button lock. I got in and sank down and took a last look around. I finally found courage to crank my car and began to drive down the trail to the main highway. As I was just about to turn around, I saw it. It stood as tall as the trees and stared at me. I hit the gas and fishtailed, but I made it. As I reached the main road, it was in pursuit, and it was keeping up. After a few miles, I looked back, and it was gone. To this day, I had never gone back, not even to the region and nowhere near those mountains. Looking it up, I found several myths about the creature and its origins, and I believe you should too. It's quite unique. Stay safe and know that the world is far more vast than we will ever know. A wealthy man wanted to go hunting in a part of northern Canada where few people had ever hunted. He traveled to a trading post and tried to find a guide to take him, but no one would do it. It was too dangerous, they said. Finally, he found an Indian who needed money badly, and he agreed to take him. This Indian's name was Defago. They made camp in the snow near a large frozen lake. For 3 days they hunted, but they had nothing to show for it. The third night a windstorm came up. They lay in their tent listening to the wind howling and the trees whipping back and forth. To see the storm better, the hunter opened the tent flap. What he saw startled him. There wasn't a breath of air stirring, and the trees were standing perfectly still, yet he could hear the wind howling. And the more he listened, the more it sounded like if it was calling Defago's name. "Defago," it called. "Defago." I must be losing my mind, the hunter thought. But Defago had gotten out of his sleeping bag. He was huddled in the corner of the tent with his head buried in his arms. "What's this all about?" the hunter asked. "It's nothing," Defago said. But the wind did continue to call his name, and Defago became more tense and more restless. "Defago," it called. "Defago." Suddenly he jumped to his feet and began to run from the tent, but the hunter grabbed him and wrestled him to the ground. "You can't leave me out here," the hunter shouted. Then the wind called again, and Defago broke loose and ran into the darkness. The hunter could hear him screaming as he went. Again and again he cried, "Oh, my fiery feet, my burning feet of fire!" And then his voice faded away, and the wind died down. At daybreak, the hunter followed Defago's tracks in the snow. They went through the woods and down toward the lake, then out onto the ice. But soon he noticed something strange. The steps Defago had taken got longer and longer. They were so long no human being could have taken them. It was as if something had helped him to hurry away. The hunter followed the tracks out to the middle of the lake, but they disappeared. At first he thought that Defago must have fallen through the ice, but there wasn't any hole. Then he thought that something had pulled him off the ice, perhaps into the sky, but that made no sense. As he stood wondering what could have happened, the wind picked up again. Soon it was howling as it had the night before. This is when he heard Defago's voice. It was coming from up above. And again he heard Defago screaming, "My fiery feet! My burning feet!" But there was nothing to be seen. Now the hunter wanted to leave that place as fast as he could. He went back to camp and packed. Then he left some food for Defago and he started out. Weeks later he reached civilization. The following year he went back to hunt in that area again. He went to the same trading post to look for a guide. The people there could not explain what had happened to Defago that night, but they had not seen him since. "Maybe it was a Wendigo," one of them said, and he laughed. "It's supposed to come up with the wind. It drags you along at great speed until your feet are burned away, and the more you try to fight, the more it grabs you and holds you tight. Then it carries you into the sky and it drops you. It's just a crazy story, but that's what some of the Indians say." A few days later, the hunter was at the trading post again. An Indian came in and sat by the fire. He had a blanket wrapped around him, and he wore his hat so that you couldn't see his face. The hunter thought there was something familiar about him. He walked over and asked, "Are you Defago?" The Indian didn't answer. "Do you know anything about him?" No answer. He began to wonder if something was wrong, if the man needed help, but he couldn't see his face. Are you all right?" he asked. Still no answer. To get a look at him, he lifted the Indian's hat, and then he screamed. There was nothing under the hat but a pile of ashes. This story is 100% true, and I'm writing it on here to warn other people and let them know that there's definitely something out there, and to this day I still don't know what it is, nor have I gone into any woods or any forest whatsoever. If you don't believe me, that's completely fine. Read this as a fun story at your own expense. But for those of you out there with an open mind, or if you've seen something yourself, just know you're not alone. And just typing out and remembering this account is causing me to shake with anxiety and pure fear. First off, I am a girl and live in North Carolina of the United States. I was 15 at the time of my encounter and was definitely not a believer in anything supernatural, paranormal, or anything of the sort. It happened while I was at a local summer camp. There was absolutely nothing special about that day. No weird lights, people, animals, sounds, or anything else. It was just the same camp schedule as I'd grown used to in the last 2 weeks that I'd been there. My age group had just finished lunch and was able to persuade the counselor to let us play a game called Scatter down by the lake. It's like a giant hide-and-seek in the woods. Now, we had played this at least 20 times before that day, and nothing weird happened to any of us. And we all grew up playing in the woods and in these woods, so it's not like we had an aversion of fear or anything like that to the woods. But for some reason, that day when our counselor shouted, "Scatter!" and I ran to find my hiding place, it became a whole new ballgame. I had run as fast and as far as I could while still being able to see the lake, as were our rules, and had found a huge old uprooted tree that I decided would be the perfect hiding place. So I lay down as close as I could against the ground and waited. I had been there for about 5 minutes when I suddenly heard a voice calling my name in a weird, dreamy-like voice, and not just any voice. My mom's. Now, me and my mom are extremely close, thick as thieves, so I'd know her voice anywhere, and I would swear on my own grave that it was without a doubt hers. But I knew it couldn't be her. She was 20 miles away at work, and even if it had actually been her and she'd come to pick me up early, the voice wouldn't have been coming from the lake. It would have been coming from the woods, beyond the border of the camp. I knew I should have run away from this strange mimic mom voice, but I couldn't. It was almost hypnotic. It messed with my thoughts and gave me doubts like, well, it could be Mom. What if it is and she's hurt? I have to help her. All these things were flooding into my mind like someone had broken a dam I didn't even know was there, until finally they overwhelmed me and my emotions got the better of me, and I took off running in the direction that this voice was coming from. I ran as far as I could with only this strange voice as my guide. I couldn't have run for more than 5 or maybe 7 minutes when I got to a clearing and the voice suddenly stopped. When I entered the clearing and I didn't hear my mom's voice calling me anymore, I could finally think clearly again, and I started to have little alarm bells go off inside my head. "You idiot, that's not Mom. You should run." But I couldn't run. I didn't know where to run. I had gotten so far away, had lost sight of the lake by camp, and had absolutely no idea where I was. I was completely exhausted to boot. With no other options than to sit and catch my breath, I did just that. No sooner had I sat down when more warning bells went off in my mind. I quickly did a 360 survey around the clearing and noticed a strange noise. It wasn't the continuation of the voice before. No, it was a distinct sound of chattering teeth, like if you were cold, only there was no one else around, and it was in the middle of June in North Carolina. There's no way someone could be cold. And that's when I heard it. Leaves and sticks crunch on the edge of the small clearing, and I realized something was watching me. And then whatever it was moved in fast circles around the clearing, almost like circling prey. And it was at that moment I knew whatever it was had led me out there, away from the rest of my group. Exactly like predator, my instincts had been screaming at me that that's what it was. Without any other option other than to try and escape, I took off in the direction I thought I had come from and sprinted as fast as I could, all the while hearing the chittering of teeth and sticks crunching behind me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't dare turn around to see what was chasing me. I knew that if I did, I would slow down, and I absolutely would not slow down. It felt like a lifetime of running away from this thing before I finally saw the lake. And even though I didn't think I could run faster than I ever had, is when I broke the tree line, and I did run faster. I ran to the lake where I knew my friends were. At that point, I felt safe enough to stop and look back and see just what had been chasing me. But when I did, I only saw a fleeting form running back the way I had come, and the distinct sound of the chittering teeth faded. When I finally found my counselor, who was the seeker supposed to find us all, I was hysterical with fear and hugged her as tight as I could. When I finally calmed down, she tried to get me to tell her what happened, but I just asked, "Were you calling my name?" Before she even said anything, I already knew the answer. After all, it had been my mom's voice that led me away from everyone else. But what she said was so much more bone-chilling. She told me, "No one called for you. We didn't even know you were gone. Everyone is still hiding. The game's not even over yet." Now, this is still hard for me to wrap my head around because it shook me to my core. This story takes place just over a year ago in late November of 2008. I live in a rural suburb in southeast Wisconsin near a line of woods and ponds. My town is small and everything is silent and dark by 9 p.m. I tend to walk my dog after dinner and before bed, and my town is pretty safe, so walking her in the dark has never fazed me. Until this. I live in an apartment complex that is on the end of a residential street, so most of the street is just older houses. One night, while walking my dog, around 10:30 p.m. I think, when I saw someone or something on the front lawn of one of these houses. They didn't have a light on their front porch, so most of the lawn was dark. But with lights from the surrounding houses, I could see a figure standing in the middle of their lawn. It was very tall and extremely skinny, almost as tall as the roof of their ranch, because even standing in the middle of the front yard, it looked almost as tall as the house. It was standing on its hind legs, but had antlers or some type of tall ears like a bunny, and its arms and legs were abnormally long and stretched to the bone. The moment I saw it, my body froze, and I had that feeling that you only get when you're near immediate danger or evil. Now, for context, I do love the supernatural, paranormal, and even true crime. I've lived in a, without a doubt, haunted house, and frequently go on after-hours explorations of known haunted houses, and I have seen and experienced many paranormal events. That feeling is undeniable once you are familiar with it. So this tall, lanky creature is standing there, and I can't see its face, but by its positioning, I know it has noticed me. My dog, who is normally aware of every living creature from a mile away in a snowstorm, is completely unaware of its presence. It felt like longer, but it was only a few seconds before this creature jumped straight up in the air, and I mean straight up, not forward, and it bounded to the back of the house in 3 large strides. It didn't make a sound, and the way it jumped and moved was unlike any animal I've ever seen. The closest I would akin it to would be like a deer, but it was on its hind legs, and it had the body and features of a stretched out human, but with antlers or maybe tall ears. I felt stuck and almost hypnotized by the whole thing, but I came to my senses enough to call attention to my dog and turn around to head for home. Behind all of the houses on the side of the street is woods, and some of the trees wrap around between this house and the neighboring house coming back towards home. We turned around, my eyes glued to the trees, and when we got to the middle of the houses, I could see 2 eyes watching me between those houses. The presence and overall weight of the feeling this whole encounter gave me still sticks with me clearly as the night it happened. I can remember it all so vividly and still feel the weight. Ever since that night, I've been thinking about it and running through all of the possibilities of what it could have been, but always coming up with no explanation. It wasn't until about a month ago that I was watching a special on supernatural encounters that I heard about Wendigos. The description fit perfectly and made my blood run even colder. I'm fully convinced that what I saw that night had to have been a Wendigo. I've made a point to only walk my dog during the daylight during summer months, and only on the connecting street that is the main road of my town. Since that night, I haven't had any other direct encounters with it, except one event that I'm not sure is related, but elicited the same feeling of being watched. Across from my apartment complex, on the same side as the woods and of the encounter, there is a small pond surrounded by trees. A few weeks ago, my brother was over, and he was outside, smoking, when he came in quickly and locked the door behind him. I had mentioned my encounter to him when it first happened, but he shrugged it off like most people I told, and likely didn't give it a second thought. And he looked shaken and kept looking through the peephole in my door and not saying anything. He finally got out that he was outside smoking and heard loud dragging and rustling sounds coming from the wooded pond area. He said he was listening for about a minute and thought he caught a glimpse of something very tall near the tree line. He described it as the sound it would make if someone were dragging a heavy animal or body through rough brush, and he had a feeling of dread and heaviness, like he couldn't look away and was being honed in on by something. Normally, I'm the type of person that would go out and look for myself, maybe even going down by the pond to explore and find something, but this case shuts all of that down. There is something viscerally evil about this creature that not even I care to explore further. I've tried telling people in my life about all of this, but as most people do with this type of stuff, none of them have really put any stock into it except for my brother, now that he's had his own experience. I'm of the mind that things beyond our comprehension and everyday scope absolutely do exist, and this is one I won't be messing with or going on adventures to see again. Legends and beliefs do exist for a reason, and this is one I don't want to mess with. So, Wendigo in my neighborhood, let's not meet again. My sister and I took a ride on our horses a few days ago, and I would say our horses are fairly spook-proof. They sit still when we shoot rifles off their backs, so when they get spooked at a tall, dark, twisted figure in the corner of the woods, we flipped out and booked it back to the barn. We rode them straight into the barn, sucking down so we wouldn't get knocked off as we ran straight into their stalls. My sister was in a separate stall opposite me with her horse. We locked the stalls and bolted the doors shut from the inside. This was a feature I never thought we would need. Deadbolts on the inside of a stall and wood windows were there, so there was no way inside. I heard it chase us. Whatever it was had been following us closely through the field, and I think we barely escaped. I didn't even notice my horse was bleeding on her left hip. I felt her kick while we were riding away, but I didn't think something actually got her. She was sweaty, and I could see the white in her eyes. I stood away from the window and the door. My father must have seen us, or because we heard gunshots coming from the right side of the barn going towards the field, I called out to Sherry, which is not her real name, asking her if she was okay. She was, but her horse was hurt just like mine. She asked if I saw what it was that scared the horses. I told her I barely saw anything, but to be honest, I still don't know what it was. But it was thin and dark, and it smelled rotten. It left claw marks deep in our horses' backsides. They'll have matching scars, but I don't think they'll let us take them back to the woods. They haven't left their stalls for days. My dad described it as a really mutated and mangled dog person that he shot at when it started to run towards the barn. He made it bleed, but we haven't found a body. To be fair, he was pretty far away from it, so he didn't get a good look. So what was it? I've heard of skinwalkers and wendigos, so I thought I'd post my story and ask. We have no clue to this day, but it always comes back at the end of every month without fail, and it kills our livestock. It hasn't come this close to us before, but now it's become a very scary problem, so any help would be appreciated. If anyone knows what this is, please let me know. Alright guys, that's everything we have tonight. Please hit that subscribe if you liked any of these stories. Please click the like. Definitely don't forget to hit the bell icon so you don't miss a single episode. They come out every Wednesday. I will see you guys in the next one.